Can't decide if this story is going to piss some people off or not, but I'm going to tell it anyway. All right, so I'm going to tell you the story of these two brothers, Daniel and Claude. So Daniel and Claude, growing up, unfortunately, their situation was not good. They had a dad who, let's say, was emotionally underdeveloped. He had his own wounds, and he took it out on them, right? He was physically and verbally, emotionally abusive to these two boys. Started young, went for a long time. Finally, they get out of the house as early as they can to get away from this dad who is bad news, right? He hits them, he overreacts, he's not emotionally available, he's not only is he not doing the positive things, he's not sharing wisdom and guiding them, but he's also loses his temper at the drop of a hat. He's screaming at them, he's cussing at them, telling them all kinds of negative things, and he's physically harming them and hitting them. So they grow up with an abusive father. And because of that, naturally, like, it takes some work for them to get their feet under them. Well, so Claude has a real hard time getting his feet under him. And Claude eventually gets married. He's not a great husband. He's sort of, unfortunately, he's sort of what you would expect to be at least a possibility, maybe even a probability, with the father and the upbringing that he had. He was emotionally unavailable and distant and closed off toward his wife, verbally and physically abusive toward her. And then when they had their first son, as much as he didn't want to act that way, the cycle just repeats itself, right? And Claude becomes an abusive father. And it's all from the hurt. It's all from the trauma of his own childhood. Is my dad did these things to me, and therefore I end up doing it to my kids. So that was Claude's story, is that he grew up in this terrible situation and ended up creating basically the same situation. You could argue it's because he didn't know how to do it otherwise, right? Daniel grew up, and similarly, it took him a minute to get his feet under him, but he did. And Daniel's thinking was, that was horrific. I'm going to do everything in my power, as long as I'm breathing, to make sure that my family experience and my kids, if I ever have them, do not experience what I just experienced, because it was horrid and it was evil and it was wrong. So Daniel took this experience and he got married, and he was like, the last thing I'm ever gonna do is that bullshit that my dad did to my mom. And then they have their first kid, and he's going, the last thing that I will allow to happen to my kid is what happened to me. And so Daniel is far more than the average person, incredibly intent on the experience that he wants to make sure that his kid has. His emotional availability and vulnerability, and sharing wisdom and being gentle physically and emotionally. And as a result, Daniel's son grows up in this incredibly loving and nurturing environment and is able to thrive. And Claude's son, unfortunately, is not. He doesn't grow up in that environment, and is therefore now facing the same challenges that Claude did. The interesting thing is that everyone who hears that story can understand why Claude was the way that he was as a father. It was because of what he experienced. He carried trauma, he carried hurt and pain from his childhood into his adulthood. And so Claude had what I would classify as an extremely valid reason, not an excuse. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but he had a really valid reason. Like, yeah, of course I'm abusive. My father beat the shit out of me and screamed at me and cussed at me and set me up for this. The story of Daniel and Claude is that they both have the same reason. They both have the same excuse, and the excuse gave them each something. What the excuse gave Claude was absolution. It gave Claude the feeling that, like, I can't help it. Right? It takes some of the sting of guilt away, because he can't help it. How's he supposed to do any better? Nothing better was modeled for him or shown to him. His experience was terrible. And so his excuse of his childhood gave him the absolution. It gave him an out and a way to sort of throw off responsibility for his actions as a father, because he could point to his childhood and go, that's what happened to me. Like, what was I supposed to do? Daniel's experience and his excuse or reason gave him something completely different. It gave him motivation to make sure that his family was different and that his kids' experience was different. And so his background, which is the same as Claude's, instead of giving Daniel absolution and allowing him to sort of wipe his hands clean and feel like it wasn't his fault, what it gave him was the joy and richness and fulfillment, of creating the family that he only dreamed of as a kid, of creating what he hoped for and never got. What could be more satisfying than that? Both of them had the excuse. Both of them had valid reasons. What happened to Claude was not right. It wasn't fair. It was wrong. It was evil. And anyone can say, yeah, makes sense that Claude became the kind of father that he did. How was he supposed to not become that? But there's an answer to that question. Daniel embodies the answer to that question. Daniel goes, oh, this is how you don't. You take what happened to you and you identify it as wrong or evil, not the way things are supposed to be, and you let it strengthen and motivate you and solidify your resolve to make sure that you don't repeat that mistake. My point is, we all have really crappy things. I've never met a single person who doesn't have hurt, pain, and trauma. All of us are Claude and Daniel in some way. And the question is, what are we going to take from that experience? Are we going to take the absolution and just say, I'm not responsible. Look at the crap that happened to me. Or are we going to take it and let it shape us and motivate us to make the world and our lives and our family and what we leave behind better than what was given to us? That's the story of Claude and Daniel.